And I pray that you help us as a church, Lord, to continue to do your work and to move forward, Father, in what you would have us do. I pray in Christ's name, amen.
Testing. musician, recording artist, and a few weeks ago I came out with my very first song, my first single. And yeah, it's called I Believe It. Feel free to stream it anywhere you listen to music, any streaming platform. It's called I Believe It by Jensen. And it just speaks of God's promises. And I think especially in our time today, that's what gets us through, right? Remembering God's promises. I wrote this song in 2019, and it was born out of a little journal entry I had from my journal that I used for my devotionals. And this note said, I believe it, and it is so, not because I feel it, because God has promised. And during this time, God was teaching me a very important lesson, and that is His goodness, His promise does not change, and it does not rely on my feelings. So whatever you're going through today, I invite you to meditate upon the words of the song and remember His promises, because they're true, even when we don't feel them. So this is I Believe It. When the giants come, I've got
Good morning to everybody. We have a whole program devoted to the children of our church, and the sermon is the same. We're devoting that to our children also. Let's bow our heads for prayer before I begin. Dear God, may these words be your words. Please open our minds so that we can listen to you. Amen. I may have to have somebody upstairs do the slides. My clicker's not working. Well, let's try this just a second. Aha, now it is. Good. Let's either open our Bibles or use a screen or use your devices. Let's open to Genesis 19, verses 1 to 3. I have the New American Standard Version. Now the two angels came to Sodom in the evening as Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he arose to meet them and bowed down with his face to the ground. And he said, "Now behold, my lords, please turn aside into your servant's house and spend the night. Wash your feet, and then you may rise early and go on your way." They said, however, "No, but we shall spend the night in the square." Yet he urged them strongly. So they turned aside to him and entered his house. And he prepared a feast for them and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. Maybe this isn't working quite right. I may need new batteries. Whoops. Next slide, please. No, we're back. We're way too advanced. Next slide. The sun is setting in Sodom. Back up, please. Darkness deepens at the city gates. Light is lifting from the hills of Moab, will soon make night complete. Shadows reach into the streets to embrace the two weary travelers. It's time for rest, but there's no place to go. The two strangers prepare to sleep in the street, and obviously they have traveled a long distance because only total strangers would dare to sleep in the streets of Sodom. An older man observing from the city gate hurries to their side. He vigorously urges them to spend the night in his home. But the strangers refuse his hospitality. "You don't understand," the older man persists. "Men don't sleep in the streets of Sodom. You must come to my house." Lot will not be refused. He knows the dangers they would face if they stayed outside all night. So the two strangers finally accept his hospitality. They follow him to a small house, enter, and the door securely closes behind them. This man, Lot, he's a good man. He's hospitable. He's Abraham's nephew. He has high ideals. But the scene has not gone unnoticed. Let's continue with verses 4 and 5. Next slide. Before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, surrounded the house, both young and old, all the people from every quarter, and they called to Lot and said to him, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to have relations with them." Next slide. The darkening streets outside are soon filled with darker minds. "Bring out the men that we may have relations with them." Lot's appeal fails. Reason finds no response. The house is surrounded. There is no escape. neither can the door long withstand such pounding. The bestial mob outside will enter soon, only made more insanely savage by resistance. Inside, the two teenage girls instinctively flee to their father's side for protection. Where else can they go? But even this, of course, is hopeless. Their father cannot protect them from such a mob. Could there be a worse fate? Next slide. Let's continue reading verses 6 to 8. But Lot went out to them at the doorway and shut the door behind him and said, "Please, my brothers, do not act wickedly. Now behold, I have 2 daughters who have not had relations with men. Please let me bring them out to you, and do to them whatever you like. But only do nothing to these men, inasmuch as they have come under the shelter of my roof." Next slide. Yes, there could be something worse. Betrayal. In such a desperate moment, could there be anything worse than betrayal by one's own father? "I will deliver my daughters to you." Dazed, stunned, bewildered, the 2 girls look at their father. They can't comprehend. Their faces register disbelief. Could they have heard correctly? Surely this is a mistake, a nightmare from which they will soon awaken. Darkness is closing in on our world today. The sun is setting on this sinful society. The light of righteousness is fading quickly in the 21st century. Sometimes the darkness seems deepest at our very own gates. Shadows are reaching out for our children. It seems that the sodomites are pounding at our very own doors. Shall we betray our children? Shall we deliver our children to them? Or are we even now delivering our children to them? Can it be true? Next slide. Picture young children looking wistfully after mommy or daddy. Well, the daycare teacher reassures them, "Mommy will be back at 5 o'clock. You'll be okay." Probably no Seventh-day Adventist mother would place her small children in daycare just to carry on social or self-gratifying activities. But what about the working mother? Is it possible to reason, if I don't work, we're going to have to settle for a lower standard of living? We'll have to live in a simpler home, wait even longer to purchase that furniture I've been wanting, maybe have fewer clothes, and vacations out. There's always reasons to work, but for myself, I had to stop work and arrange to stay at home when my 2-year-old son looked up into my eyes and with tears in his eyes said, "But Mommy, I want to be home with you." It wasn't until 7 years later that I went back to teaching in a 1-room Seventh-day Adventist school in Hutchinson, Kansas. And my children were in my classroom. In the mid-1960s, a group of 300 7th and 8th grade boys from Christian families in Seventh-day Adventist schools logged accurately the time their father spent with them over a 2-week period of time. The majority of them saw Dad only at the dinner table, and some never saw their father for days at a time. The average time that father and son were alone together for the entire week was 7.5 minutes. Cliff Chadwick reported in Lifestyle magazine in 2011 that the average time a father spent talking with his children at that time was 7 minutes a day, up from the 1960s. Are these numbers any different today? Where have the fathers gone? Well, they've gone to many places, but what concerns me is that they've gone out of the everyday lives of their children. Next slide. In 1905, Ellen White wrote, "The father should enforce in his family the sterner virtues, energy, integrity, honesty, patience, courage, diligence, and practical usefulness. And what he requires of his children, he should himself practice, illustrating these virtues in his own manly bearing." But assertiveness is not enough, for the statement goes on to say, combine affection with authority, kindness, and sympathy and firm restraint. Give some of your leisure hours to your children. Become acquainted with them, associate with them in their work and their sports, and win their confidence. Cultivate friendship with them, especially your sons. In this way, they will be a strong influence for good. God gave us the family for several reasons. One was to give us a small understanding of our relationship to Him. Yet another reason was for strength to withstand Satan's temptations and deceptions. The Christian family united as a body is stronger than an individual in resisting the devil. We must ensure safety in our children's training during their young, impressive years. God's gift of love must be cultivated. Next slide. The truth is that in the 21st century, a teen is often seeking out and doing what teens have always done. Jerusha Clark, co-author of Your Teenager is Not Crazy, Understanding Your Teen's Brain Can Make You a Better Person, says that if you're on the lookout for teens in the wild, it's not too hard to find them because they're going to be where other teens are. Today, this may be a park, a convenience store parking lot, or a friend's basement. Basements are big. Psychologist John Duffy says, especially the basement where no parent can be seen within a quarter-mile radius. Duffy, author of The Available Parent, has been working with teens for 20 years. And while basements and parking lots seem like benign places to be, Duffy confirms that, yes, teens of all stripes tell me they're often entirely not honest with their parents about where they're hanging out. Families need to enjoy more of each other. Now, how can we develop warm relationships and family togetherness? Here's 4 suggestions that I have for you. Next slide, please. Take time to do fun things with your children. Moms, are there times when you're washing dishes and clothes are piled high, waiting to be washed, and then the door opens and in rushes your children? Hey, Mom, let's fly kites. The wind is just right. What are you going to do? I know a mom that didn't say a word about her feelings. The dishes and the wash would wait. She dried her hands and she went outside and flew the kites. Years later, when someone asked those grown children some of their fond memories of childhood, do you remember? One of them began, the time we went out with Mom and flew kites. My own daughter fondly remembers climbing trees. Children remember the simple, fun times. Do fun things with your children. Next slide. Use your evenings at home as family prime time. A togetherness spirit can be fostered as children and parents enjoy a portion of the evening reading, doing homework, playing a game, or just chatting about the events of the day. Small children love to have daddy tuck them into bed. And non-talkative teens will even break down and express themselves while working on homework, when parents are nearby to help with the task at hand. Just being together helps develop family togetherness. Next slide. Add some surprises to your family life. Some surprises that might spark the family spirit could be notes in lunchboxes or briefcases, or dates for special night out, especially with your children. Welcome home banners, flowers, an unbirthday party just to let someone know they're special. Surprise the special people in your family. My last suggestion for gluing your family togetherness and keeping your children from the streets, amusement parks, and teen hangouts is, next slide, plan for your family relationship. Good family times don't just happen. Interesting family worships don't usually come by accident. Social events don't just fall into place, nor do vacations. Memories and pictures don't just appear from nowhere. The Elijah message of Malachi does two things. It turns the hearts of the parents to their children, and in response, it turns the hearts of the children to their parents. The primary initiative for restoring relationships belongs to mom and dad, as they need to do the planning. Next slide. Do I deliver my children to technology? Here we must recognize that the Sodomites have breached our own very gates and made entry into our homes. If it weren't for a Russian engineer who immigrated to America, the world might not be watching television today. Yet Vladimir Zorikin is certainly not a household name. Zorikin's lifelong interest in electronics began when he pushed a buzzer on his father's steamboat, and a sailor promptly responded. He was hooked. He became an electrical engineer and moved to the United States by 1919. And in 1923, he proudly demonstrated his most enduring invention, the television. And in this case, it showed a cloudy image of boats on the river outside the lab on his screen. In 1929, Zworykin obtained the patent for the color TV, even though it wasn't available till much later. But despite the fact that he lived to see his most famous invention flourish, he died in 1982 at the age of 92. Zworykin rejected what TV had become. He told a reporter, "The technique is wonderful. It's beyond my imagination. But the programs, I would never let my children come even close to this thing." Eliminating television and computers and phones and videos and video games and movies would be unsuccessful at this point in our lives. Your children would watch the screen somewhere else where no supervision is exercised. It's probably better to control your own TV and screens. Control is the key, and it calls for a never-ending vigilance. The educational power of television is admittedly enormous. The appeal of the moving picture is greatly magnified by the frequency of exposure. In 2020, just a couple years ago, the American Academy of Child Adolescent Psychiatry estimated that children between the ages of 8 and 12 spend an average of 4 to 6 hours per day watching screens. Teens up to 9 hours daily. The article stated that parents may not even know that their children are constantly exposed to violence, crime, risk-taking and unsafe stunts, sexual content, substance abuse, cyberbullies and predators, as well as misleading and inaccurate information. Many people say the screen has no effect anyway. If that's the case, why would a 30-second or a 1-minute commercial give you or your child the desire to buy anything? Research has shown a real difference between the children who watch violent shows and those who watch nonviolent ones. Technology has altered the landscape for today's teenagers, enabling them to seek out new possibilities for adventure, trouble, and outwitting their parents. Once they get bored with hanging out in the parking lot or the basement, all they need to do is reach in that back pocket for that miraculous screen. There's the fad of taking selfies and documenting daredevil stunts, like standing on one foot and the other hanging in midair on the roof of a building, or even climbing a crane. By taking a picture and putting it up online, says Duffy, you are verifying that you're out and well, and you're 14, and there's nothing cooler than that. Next slide. By the time a child graduates from high school, they will have spent over 18,000 hours watching screens, 12,000 hours in school, and only a little over 3,000 hours interacting with their parents. The negative self-image and self-esteem gained from this will continue to influence these children the rest of their lives unless parents take control over how their children are influenced. Next slide. The gods of expensive clothes, toys, friends, and money may all separate our children from Jesus Christ. Parents are responsible for developing any of these God-separating habits in children's lives. Probably the most important God-separating habit allowed to develop is selfishness. This is the result of allowing the toy gods, the car gods, the money gods, and the other gods to mature and grow. Unselfishness may be taught to children of all ages through 3 basic rules. 1, you may not hurt yourself. 2, you may not hurt others. And 3, you may not hurt things. These 3 commands cover most areas of behavior and allow for the framework of decision-making as children grow in their everyday lives. A Christ-centered home provides the basic needs for a child to develop an unselfish character. The Christ-centered home meets the child's need to belong, the child's need for affection, the need for accomplishment, the need for achievement, and the need for recognition for these accomplishments and achievements. Parents, do you have worship with your children? Next slide, please. When was the last time you prayed with your children? Do you pray to God to give this child the wisdom to see through the illusions of a sinful world today so that they will desire God's standards? The entire church body must pray for the children of our church, as well as meet their needs if we expect the youth to remain in church. We must help our children to discover who they are and why they are on this earth. We need to make God the number 1 priority, and then God will become our children's number 1 priority. Next slide. Seventh-day Adventist Christian education isn't perfect, But then, judging by the recent studies and the news, neither is public education and other private education. Perfection cannot be found on this earth. Next slide. Seventh-day Adventist parents are counseled to send their children to schools where education is based on true scriptural foundation. Efficient as public schools are, and no one denies that public educators are dedicated, hardworking, and sincere, the purposes of Seventh-day Adventist education and other education are not the same. It is God's purpose that young people find in our schools cities of refuge from a sin-darkened society, where teachers and students treasure every ray of light that comes from the throne of God. Here, habits of self-control, respect for others, reverence of God are stressed, in addition to academic excellence. Some object that Seventh-day Adventist schools do not always measure up to the divine purpose. True, undeniably. I have attended, I have taught in, I was principal at, sent my children to, and served on various Seventh-day Adventist school boards. It is my conviction that when parents make it clear that they want high standards and will support the teachers in adhering to divine principles, they succeed. My children attended Seventh-day Adventist schools every year from elementary age when they were in my school through college and had many teachers. Did they get quality education? Yes. They are now both very successful adults, and their children are attending Seventh-day Adventist schools. A parent once reminded me, a little bit of the teacher goes home each day with my child. The teacher's hands do not handle clay or marble or bronze, but they handle something more precious than these. They handle human character and fashion, often without themselves knowing it, the supreme creation of humanity, nobility in men and women. They mold souls. A different mother explained to me that it was cheaper to send her child to a nearby public school. Cheaper in what ways? Cheaper in cash, no doubt. But will the public schools be cheaper in anxieties, in regrets, in disappointed hopes, in distorted life plans, in eternal results? To conclude, I'd like to share a parable with you. Once upon a time, there lived a very happy family. There was a mother and a father, a little sister and a big brother. There was also a grandfather, but grandfather lived very far away. In fact, the children had never been to see him. Mother and father often talked about how grandfather could do just about anything. He could manage a business, he could repair his own car, he even built his own house. Grandfather is very wise, mother and father would say, and someday when you're old enough, you can make the trip to grandfather's house. We want you to meet him and learn from him. He can teach you so much about life. And finally, the children were old enough. Both were excited about the new adventure, and now the family had to decide how the children would get to grandfather's house. This was a major decision, and they had two options. Next slide. First, there was the public bus. It was a shiny double-decker tour bus. It had air conditioning, padded reclining seats, stereo, headphones, all of the latest video equipment, and many other comforts. The most attractive thing about the bus was the price of the ticket. It was very, very reasonable. The cost was well subsidized by advertisers, and their messages were carried over the video system. 4-color display advertising was on each seat, but there was another reason the price of the ticket could be kept so low. The bus company was subsidized by many attractions along its route. The bus scheduled numerous stopovers, and they really kept that trip enticing. These attractions often turned into distractions, and passengers never arrived at their final destination, finding the stopovers just too good to leave. They stayed. When the bus arrived at the end of the line, it was very often nearly empty. Now, the only other alternative to the bus was private car. This meant the family station wagon. The station wagon wasn't nearly as attractive as the tour bus, and it certainly didn't have the same luxurious creature comforts. It was an old model, yet it had been kept in good condition. However, this option had its drawbacks too. The station wagon really guzzled gas, and gas wasn't cheap. It didn't have a video system. It was plain, basic transportation. And then there was also the chore of driving. The trip to grandfather's house would take days, time mother and father could use to spend on other important things. Not to mention the cost of meals along the way and the places to stay at night. The list of drawbacks went on and on. Taking the kids to grandfather's house in the family station wagon would be a major expense. Mother and father had many discussions about the trip. They carefully considered both options. The bus was cheaper and nicer. The bus station was right around the corner. The kids could meet new people and have great new experiences while traveling across the country. And brother and sister would certainly receive a broader education on the tour bus than cooped up in the family station wagon. But on the other hand, mother and father were a bit concerned about the distractions along the way. What if the children found an entertainment so enticing they decided not to continue the trip? They might never get to grandfather's house at all. Finally, the family decided the best thing to do was to call grandfather. They would ask his opinion. After all, he was a very wise man. And they got on the telephone and they explained the situation. They carefully listed all the pros and all the cons of taking the public bus or a private car. Grandfather patiently listened to all of the information. Well, what do you think? Mother and father asked. Grandfather thought for a moment, and then he quietly answered, I guess it all depends on what's most important, the trip or arriving at the destination. Even brother and sister had to agree that grandfather was a very wise man indeed. The decision whether or not to send your children to public school, a large private school, or an Adventist school which teaches your values and may prove to be the single most important decision you will ever make in your children's lives. Which is most important in your children's lives? The trip or arriving at the final destination? Let's go back to poor Lot in Genesis chapter 19. You might have to look at your own Bibles for this because I didn't put it on a slide. In total despair, he said, I will deliver my children to you, because he thought there was no alternative. He thought that this was the only thing that could be done. But he was mistaken. There were heavenly influence present. The power of God was being applied to his situation. And in Genesis 19:10, we find that angels were working with him and for him, although he did not know it. Next slide. And so it is with us. We need not surrender. We need not give way to feelings of frustration and despair as we attempt to save our children. Trusting in God with unyielding faith, we may firmly say, I will deliver my children to Jesus Christ when he comes for them.
Song, I want to invite you guys to please stand. And we want to sing this prayer over you guys. And I think it would be really amazing if you guys could sing this prayer over the families of our church and of our children and and over the school as well. Can we do that? Yeah? Okay, let's sing this prayer.
in our children in the way you want them to live and the way they ought to live, so that we can deliver them to you when you come in the clouds of glory. Amen.